Hello and welcome back to this Monday episode of FreightWaves. Now I'm Anthony Smith here alongside Thomas Watson, the one, the only. And Thomas, we have a special guest here with us. We have the one and only Danny Gomez. Danny, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So Danny, of course, we get to chat with you and Tyler from time to time on Monday mornings, of course, in this amazing segment where we get to dive into some of those really hot topics that's really happening within, of course, net zero carbon's world and really throughout the supply chain and how it kind of really has implications throughout the world. This upcoming one is really interesting because there's a lot of different takes on it. We're talking about the real reason behind the thoughts of a driver shortage. Can you jump into this one a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's one that we talk about, Tyler and I, and we talk about even with folks in the industry. And the thing for me that that sticks out is there's a lot of layers and nuances to it, right? You think about driver shortage, and initially you think, okay, well, there's just not enough people willing to drive. I think what I've learned in digging through and looking at the data is there are a lot of people who are able to drive, but the job itself maybe has a very high turnover rate. I think some of the stats I saw was that a lot of companies see almost 90% turnover rate in a year. So they're basically replenishing their workforce. So what does that say, right? For the turnover rate, it means that maybe this job isn't made for everybody, and so people don't know that until they live it. And so then you dig deeper. Okay, well, we maybe we have enough people willing to drive. The job isn't great. So what can we do there? So there's obviously opportunities to make to make the job more sustainable for people. And then also, are there areas for efficiency? And one thing that I think that bubbles to the surface is, and we talk about a lot with our sponsor Convoy, is empty miles. And what are we doing to make it just supply chains more efficient in general. This empty miles is one area that we talk about. Detention times, increased detention times. What is that doing? And so for us, it dovetails into sustainability, because what we've harped on from over the last years when we started net zero carbon. Really, it started off as a journey, right? Craig and I got on the phone a year ago and got really excited about trying to tackle reducing emissions in transportation. And really that was just the start of a journey for all of us to learn kind of publicly together, as Tyler and I like to say. And in that journey and learning, what we realized is that at the core of all of this is efficiency or inefficiency. And so as we look to make efficiency gains in transportation, the good thing is that there's a lot of room for improvement. And that a lot of these efficiency gains are multidimensional in terms of the problems they're solving. And so if you think about, again, we'll go back to empty miles, reducing empty miles, what does that do for the emissions? What does it do for reliability, service? What does it do for, the needs to expand the workforce or the needs not to expand the workforce? And so I think it starts the conversation, where we're having all these things that are forcing us to have these conversations, right? Emissions, supply chain resiliency, driver shortages, just the whole reaction during the pandemic has forced us to speed things up. And I think the positive thing that we're seeing is that companies are looking to react and take action. And so, for us, for Tyler and I, when we started the journey of building a carbon product at FreightWaves, it was, let's just start asking a lot of questions, right? And so we've been asking questions, we've been talking to people. One of the things that we're doing is a working group. So we have an emissions working group that started earlier this year that's focused on talking to people who are on the front line, whether they're shippers or carriers. Even we have folks representing rail, who they're talking to us about, what is going on and how we can be more collaborative in solving this problem. And so I'd applaud, I think, FreightWaves for taking a lead in all these other companies who are also stepping up to solve this sustainability problem, which again is solving many problems in our industry.
I think you have a really great point. I really want to start off by really appreciate you all looking into especially causes of the driver shortage. If you look at the history of the modern trucking business model, it's very interesting. Started in the 1980s with deregulation. Prior to that, it was heavily regulated with the ICC in like 1935. So we get a situation where we go from heavily regulated to extreme deregulation, and now we're in this situation for the past 40 years that, like you said, trucking companies have 95% turnover. If you look at their wages, it hasn't really improved due to inflation. They're probably making 50% less. And from my experiences at large trucking carriers, the first 6 months, so you go through this process, you get trained to be a truck driver, and then you have a 50% chance of making it past the 6-month mark on a good day. Based on your research and stuff, what are some things trucking companies can do to try and stem this just massive issue of churn?
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably one that I'm not the best to answer, but I'll give a fresh take on a long problem, which is, are we doing a good job of upfront, filtering out people who, or at least disclosing, and not painting being a long haul driver with too rosy of a picture, because it is a demanding job, right? It's long hours. You're away from your family. The perception that that you're across, seeing all these parts of America is probably skewed. You're running tight schedules, and there's a lot of demands on you. And so I think that is one thing that we need to be honest with ourselves. What does this job look like? And be honest with the people who are coming to it, and make sure that we're not setting people up for failure, or ourselves, right? I don't think anyone wants to churn through and have to retrain people. That's a lot of waste and inefficiency in the system. And I think too, bringing people into the industry, and the industry itself changing, right? That we're creating, but by being more innovative, we're creating more jobs, and maybe we're shifting the need or the type of jobs. Or we'll always need to have drivers, right? But looking down the road, and I know it seems far off, but autonomous vehicles, how can that help with some capacity issues? How does that also create other jobs in the system that may be for some more appealing to be in? And so I think it's an interesting transition. Obviously, the administration is trying to support innovation in transportation, and just to see where, I came from the energy industry, power specifically, and to see the transition there where, you are mothballing coal plants, and people are converting to nat gas and solar and wind, and just to watch that industry evolve in a very quick period of time, and how the jobs shifted. I recently read an article where there's a firm who's building, specifically seeking historically coal mining communities to build solar and wind to bring jobs there. And so I think this is all very interesting, right? In a way that where we can hopefully be honest about the job and how hard it is to attract the right people, but also create more jobs. And that we need to be creating jobs across the board. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to do two things at once.
And Danny, I think you kind of hint towards something, and something that kind of really definitely pops into my mind when I think about things from an economic standpoint. And that's incentives. And now when we're looking at driver incentives, I see a lot of competition, because, maybe I can be a driver, or maybe I can fall into a different trade, maybe construction or something like that. What incentives do you see around maybe being a driver could be improved or increased, and maybe even more so into net zero carbon? What are some of the incentives that you see that could be put in place to kind of help push forward some of these more, no empty miles or more efficient route running?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, and I'll go back to what we're doing with the working group, because we got into the working group and started having conversations with firms. And so the large shippers are going to drive much of the demand for emissions efficiency, reducing emissions. And the reality is, it's early innings. People are trying to move as fast as they can. What we commonly heard is that transportation is not yet in the crosshairs, that people have been focusing on more energy intense parts of their business. And so as we pivot, I think what is around the corner from us is a period where there is pressure to be more efficient, and then that pressure starts to get pushed down to the LSPs and in turn the drivers. And so how do we incentivize people to be more efficient? Right now, all the pressure is on delivery and service, right, and timeliness and reliability. As emissions and efficiency and sustainability becomes part of the decision-making process for firms, that is really interesting and I think will accelerate the incentive for carriers to invest, right? Like in a markets-driven approach, there's going to be demand, whether that becomes a regulatory demand from some fuel standards that come from the administration, or becomes social pressure or capital markets pressure. We've already seen some of that. As that comes down, the carriers increasingly will be incentivized to reduce emissions, and that will carry down to the drivers. How that plays out, man, it's early innings, and we would love to see drivers specifically getting rewarded not only for the activity to reduce emissions, but for the communication of the data. I think a common understanding here is that there's just not enough data sharing yet to meaningfully benchmark and make gains. So I think there's all of this, right? There's so many layers here. It starts with I think the willingness to tackle the problem and to get into it, and then what we're hoping to do, Tyler and I, through the working group, is to really to bring to the surface what the problems are around the corner, and try to get people to get ahead of the curve a little bit. So I know that this is all focused on, or trying to focus on driver shortage. To me, it's just all so interlinked, and you can't think about solving one problem without addressing another. And go back to what I said at the very beginning, sustainability is a very interesting angle to come at these things, because at the core of sustainability is efficiency, and the more efficient we are, the better I think our industry operates. If you think about reducing detention times, that probably makes the job better for folks. If we think about, what I worry is that there's these upfront immediate cash bonuses that attract people to the industry, but they're not sustained. So maybe to your point, like having more sustained bonus structure for people from right now, I think it's more operations focused, and maybe changing how some of the pay structure is structured that way. But around the corner, I think being ready to pivot and to incorporate some efficiency and sustainability improvements into pay as well.
I think you bring up a great point, talking about efficiency and sustainability in regards to the truck. One last thought here. Shippers and stuff are talking about reducing idling, reducing empty miles. All of this burns diesel particulates. And so I think one thing when you're talking about in your working group, have you noticed any attempts that maybe the shippers have figured out that if they speed up their operations, then their trucks may not be idling right next to the warehouse, and so that extra 2 or 3 hours of idling saved could actually save in terms of not only fuel economy for the carrier, but also environmental impact? Because I think an interesting thing that you brought up, and maybe it's something to dig into, is that if I'm stuck idling at a shipper, not only do I have to either run my truck and clog up my filters, or maybe I have something else, I'm also polluting the area around it. Is there anything to address that? Maybe faster efficiency and turn time on a shipper could also reduce your idling and reduce empty miles?
Yeah, for sure. And the reality is there's the obvious things that are people. I think to me that seems like a very obvious thing for people to turn to and to start to address, right? And they're doing that instinctually, like kind of, I think instinctually, like a knee jerk, like this makes tons of sense. Let's tackle that. What I hope we're also doing in parallel is understanding the problem from a data perspective, because we need to be able to measure those improvements, right, as we go along. And so just to forecast what I think happens here for shippers and carriers is more precision in measuring. So being able to measure, doing the analysis and using tools, business intelligence tools, optimization tools to see where the pain points are, and to really focus the energy in the areas that that the data, and maybe it comes all back to what anecdotally we knew we should be doing, but having the data there, one, it validates the effort. It also can help us measure the improvements we're making. And I think it can help support investment in those areas. So I think you're spot on. There's some obvious low-hanging fruit that people are attacking now, and they should be doing those. But simultaneously also doing the work to make it more robust in terms of finding other opportunities to reduce and to measuring those impacts.
Awesome. Well, Danny, thank you so much for your time this morning. We'll be sure to check in with you, of course, next week. We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.